And joining us now is New York City mayoral candidate Diane Morales. Ms. Morales, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Good morning. It's so great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
We just learned yesterday that that the Working Families Party put out their endorsement. They endorsed
Yes,
their ranked choices.
they
So
did.
Scott Stringer in the first position, and they endorsed you second.
Yes.
So I wanted to know, what was your reaction when you heard that, and what does that endorsement mean?
It's really exciting to get the endorsement of the Working Families Party. My campaign has actually been focused on centering and elevating the voices of some of New Yorkers' most vulnerable, some of the most vulnerable New Yorkers. And I think that getting the sort of nod from the Working Families Party is an acknowledgement that we have actually been very effective in doing that. My campaign is also, it's a very non-traditional campaign, and it was not expected to actually get this far. So I think that it's a great affirmation and attestation to what we've done, and I'm very proud of that.
It's an endorsement that speaks to what the progressive groups who make up the Working Families Party are really looking toward, the issues that they want addressed and what they're looking to do. They've never done a ranked choice before, though, because it's the first time we're doing it here for voting in New York City.
Right.
So do you worry at all that maybe the progressive vote in the Democratic primary might be getting split up a bit?
I mean, I think that the way they did their slate is a signal as to, in the field in general. It's a very crowded field right now. So I think it's a good signal to the field as to, if your interests are progressive and really, left leaning, this is what you should be looking at. So it does a lot in terms of, I think, beginning to narrow the field for folks who have particular interests. And then I think it allows for some room, actually, within that to sort of decide from among the three of us where people stand and what matters most to them and where they want to vote.
You come from the background of being the executive from a nonprofit working for a family in the Bronx. I wanted to ask, what will you bring from that experience when it comes to deciding policy for the city? You worked with youth and families in the Bronx, underserved communities, people from low-income families. What will you from that experience?
Yeah, so I spent my entire career working with marginalized, low-income Black and Brown families, in the last decade in the South Bronx specifically, including in the poorest congressional district in the country. And I think one of the things that I bring with me and would bring into my administration as mayor is a real understanding of the challenges and the struggles and the barriers to economic and academic opportunity that our communities face on a day-to-day basis, and some of the things that we need to do in order to make sure that our systems are speaking to each other and working together in the best interest of our communities, and actually kind of how to get out of our own way so that people actually truly have access to opportunity, and what we need to do differently to make that happen on a much more universal level than currently exists. I will also just add to that my personal lived experiences as a first-generation college graduate, a single mom, an Afro-Boricua, born and raised in a community not, in Bed-Stuy, which is not all that different from the Bronx, allows me to bring that perspective to the table as well. And we've never had that at the city level. So I think it's time.
When the coronavirus pandemic hit New York City, many people noticed that it actually just exposed many of the inequities that Black and Brown communities, that lower income communities are facing even pre-pandemic.
Right.
So what are the ones that need to be most focused on as we get through this pandemic and to help us get through it?
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I think it is true that COVID-19 just further exacerbated and exposed the pandemics of inequality and racism and all those things that were existing long before 2020. One of the things I called for last year is I think we need to prioritize saving people's lives. We have for too long, from an investment perspective, focused on reacting on the back end rather than preventing things. We're never going to get the lives back that we lost in 2020. We should have paid people to stay home early on so that we could actually get the pandemic under control and people didn't have to feel like they had to risk their lives in order to provide for their families. And we should have protected those people who we knew we needed to actually keep things going. both in terms of the PPE and prioritization in terms of vaccination. I still think those things are relevant today because I don't think we're in the clear from the COVID-19 pandemic at all. So I think that's what we need to be focusing on.
And what are some of those things when you talk about focusing on the preventative instead of reacting, that now we are getting through the pandemic? I think a lot of Democratic primary voters or more progressive voters are looking for in their candidate, from their candidate.
Yeah, I mean, sure. You know, I think paying people to stay home, providing people with the economic resources that they need in order to be able to stay home and stay safe if they don't have to put their lives on the line, right? That is a critical thing. We didn't do that on the front end, and what ended up happening was not only did we lose tens of thousands of lives, but we're actually now paying for it on the back end when you think about the healthcare services that are needed, right? And all of the people that have gotten sick with COVID-19. So that is a very sort of straight line, simple thing that we could have done and should have done and should still be looking at in terms of this. In terms of the vaccine rollout, we should be prioritizing the communities that have been hit the hardest, and we should actually be working really hard to remove the barriers to access, right? Technology and all of these kind of portals that people have to go through to sign up for an appointment. It should be easy to access. There should be a combination of advanced appointments and walk-in opportunities. There should be a mobile unit on your on your corner so that you can access that. There's a lot of, I don't know how long you want me to go on for, but, I think about, policing right now, what's happening with the sort of, we see it with Dwayne, right? We see it with these robo-dogs. Where are our priorities in terms of preserving and protecting people's lives? How can we say that we don't have the money for one thing, but then invest over $70,000 in a robo-dog? Our priorities are...
You're talking about.
Yeah, the NYPD, that video that went around the other day of the NYPD entering a NYCHA development with a robo-dog, which is terrifying. At the same time that we're saying that we don't have the money to provide supports to some of our low-income, vulnerable neighbors. There's a hypocrisy there that I think is highly problematic.
I know some of your background is in education too. One of the biggest issues of the pandemic has been the closing down of the schools and reopening of New York City public schools. Yeah. What do you think about the approach the city has taken during the pandemic, and what would you do differently?
So the yo-yo approach, or the pendulum approach, the lack of clarity, the lack of communication, the lack of prioritizing real safety, all of those things have been highly problematic in the Department of Education. Last summer, last March, when we were closing down the schools, I was crying out for the idea of just, let's close the schools, let's give the teachers the time and the resources and supports they need to plan for virtual instruction, and let's prioritize distributing the electronics and the technology and the infrastructure to our families that we know need it most. We didn't do any of that. And we rushed to reopen and did it in a way that was unsafe. We have resources in the community that we could be tapping into, community-based organizations, arts and cultural institutions that should actually be used as deputized spaces, because we know the infrastructure of our schools is so poor. And we should also be engaging the staff from some of those entities to help support the socio-emotional learning of our students, because we know that our students are struggling. But we need to make sure that we're prioritizing safety first, that our teachers feel safe and that our students feel safe.
Over the past year, the city has not only dealt with the pandemic, but also the racial justice reckoning that the whole nation is going through, and the police protests that we saw all summer and throughout the year, and that we're starting to see again. So how would Mayor Morales start addressing some of those issues?
Yeah, so I was just thinking this morning before this interview, I'm so tired of marching for our lives. And I think we need to be able to actually act in a whole different kind of way. So I have been the first mayoral candidate to call for the defunding of the police. I'm the only candidate in this race that has called for defunding by $3 billion. We know that the majority of the cases that police respond to are not actually crimes in progress. They are issues of mental health and housing and substance abuse. So I've called for the creation of a community first responders department that would instead be staffed by professionals or staff that are skilled and trained in intervention and de-escalation, and who would act as a part of a broader ecosystem of human service providers and community-based organizations to connect people to what they need. Because right now we have someone with a mental health crisis, a man with a gun responds. In the best case scenario, that person gets locked up overnight and released the next day back to the very same situation. And in the worst case scenario, they get shot and killed. My proposal is that we actually have trained professionals respond to that and then connect that person to services so that we can actually help improve their lives. We need to reclaim the definition of public safety. It's not policing. Policing don't prevent crime. They respond to crime, and even then don't do so necessarily well. And we need to provide our communities with the resources that they really need to be safe. And that's, it's housing, it's jobs, it's food, and it's healthcare. Those are the things our communities need.
So when you say defunding the police, you're talking about taking a large portion of the budget, not abolishing the police, but taking a large portion of the budget and reallocating it to the services that are what you're talking about.
Yes, we're talking about divesting from policing and investing in the people, and reallocating those funds to the types of services and programs that we know actually help to create increased security and comfort and dignity for people, and in turn translate into safety. And that, ultimately, I think we all benefit from that. Everybody wants to live in a safe community. And if we've learned nothing over the course of the last 12 months, it's that my safety is linked to my neighbor's safety, right? Housing security, access to healthcare and vaccinations, and a job to provide for their families. Those are the things people really need in order for everyone to be safe.
And after this past year of incredible challenges for the city, the pandemic and the protests, many New Yorkers were indicating that they want a more progressive or a different kind of mayoral candidate than had in the past. But when we look at the polls for the Democratic primary, we see that it's not the more progressive candidates who are at the top. Andrew Yang and Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams are at the top. Why do you believe that is?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things, right? Andrew comes into the race with a lot of name recognition. He ran for president. And Eric has had a lot of lead time as someone who's held public office for a long time and has been, running for this office essentially for a long time. I think that also, the majority of New Yorkers, as the polls also show, there's a significant percentage, if not half or more, that aren't even paying attention to this race yet. And so, New Yorkers are just starting to turn their attention to this race. And I think it's still up for grabs. And, that's also part of why my campaign has pivoted to actually being out in the community and talking to people, because I think they need to know that we're here. They need to know that they have an option. And they need to know that that option is much more reflective of who they are and what their lived experiences have been than anyone else in this race.
And for my last question, I was going to ask about just that. You have decided to run for mayor in a year where campaigning is nothing like it has been in past campaigns here in New York City. It's not the sort of grassroots out shaking everybody's hand type of campaign that normally we see. So how are you finding that? And how are you campaigning? How are you reaching the communities and the people that you want to reach?
Yeah. So, a lot of the campaigning thus far has been Zoom based, right? Partially because we needed to respond to the times and keep people safe.
Right,
exactly. But a couple of weeks ago, we announced this sort of, no more Zoom policy, or we're going to be discriminate about how we do that, just because it becomes an echo chamber after a while in terms of who has access to, technology and infrastructure, who's got the luxury of the time, right? And, we've done quite a few Zooms. And so I think if that's the format that people are interested in and that appeal to them, there's lots of video that they can go back to. But the people that I am seeking to represent, the people like your family from the Bronx, or, when you were growing up or my family growing up, those people are not sitting on Zoom. And so I want to go and meet the community where they are. I want to talk to them as they are living their lives, because we know that they're struggling. So I spent the day yesterday in the Bronx. I was talking to small business owners. I was talking to a lot of the street vendors. And I want to hear from them what they're experiencing. I want to hear from them what they need. And I want them to know that they have a champion who is running for mayor of New York City and wants to prioritize and elevate them moving forward, because I see them, I value them, I respect them, and I hear them. And so, that's what we're doing moving forward. We just announced today our Politics for All People tour, which is going to just expand on more of that and do more of that and go into the communities that I'm seeking to represent as mayor of New York City.
What does being a single mom bring to your mayoral race and to your leadership style?
What it brings to my mayoral race is a lot of chaos because I'm always doing multiple things at one time. I think it brings an experience that is way more common to the working class New Yorker than not, right? We know that there's a lot of single mom households that are also part of the sort of front lines and essential workers of the city. And so I get to say that I have a firsthand understanding of their experiences and of their value and contributions to the city. And in terms of my administration, it brings I don't know if I can say this online, a kick-ass ability to multitask, right? Because we are organized, we get things done. We're always doing more than one thing at once, and I think that is a critical skill. Yeah. But it also brings a unique sort of compassion and ability to listen and willingness to listen, and an ability to sort of see and interpret nuances and negotiate and compromise in ways that actually benefit everybody. I think women historically, when women do well, we know that women then take care of not just their family, but their community. They look around to see, okay, who else can I help and how can I help? And that is a perspective that we really need in our leadership right now. And I look forward to bringing that to City Hall.
Diane Morales is candidate for New York City Mayor. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking to you.